in here, man. Let's get going here.
Yeah,
Anthony,
so
All
my
righty.
you should take a picture. You
All
should
right.
have taken
So
a picture of
I'm
that.
going to basically start off. As you can see, he's got his first screen up here. This is all the accolades. Graduate of Life College, Marietta, Georgia. Practicing for 36 years in West Islip. Founding member of the ICPA. Was a past president of the New York Chiropractic Council, Long Island. He's one of the founders of the of Chiro Futures. Uh, the way I can describe Anthony best is he's one of my good friends. Dr. Anthony Carrino, the floor is yours.
Thank you, gentlemen. So, accolades aside, all I really want to be in my legacy is someone that came and, you know, gave his gave his all for a profession that gave him everything. And I think we forget that sometimes. We get caught up in our practices and we get caught up in the changing of the times and of the guard, and no bigger time was during this pandemic. But there's still always going to be change, and there's still always going to be this need to keep moving forward, because when you give up, or you set yourself aside, or you say it's time for retirement, or you want to change things, sit back before you do any of that and see what it is that you've already accomplished. And I think that's one of the biggest things that we sometimes, we look at the people who are the most successful in the profession, and we try to compare ourselves to them. If you were to ask your patients how successful you've been, they would probably tell you, you've been the most successful person to me that's ever come into my life, because you've changed it. And if we just go with each one of those individuals that you've helped over the years, and at this stage, all of us, it's got to be thousands, right? Because we're all in practice 30 plus years. Go back and just think about the lives you have changed. Even the ones who are no longer with you or carrying your message. I got a woman that came in here the other day, told me one of your old patients said you were the best thing she ever had, and she was sorry she moved into another part of the state. And I'm like, well, who was she? And she gives me the name. I didn't even remember the woman's name. I had to go back into my old files to find her, and see who she was and what she was. And you know what? She was a great patient, but she was a back pain patient. Came in after a bad car accident. I got her 4 months later, and she was suffering. And she was still suffering when they told her, hey, listen, you're going to have to live with this, but, you can still go to therapy and this kind of stuff. But she wasn't getting any better. She met a chiropractor who was interested in helping her. And this woman sent me a patient. I don't think I've seen her in my office in 12 years. Right. And she came into my office and said, oh, so and so said you're a great chiropractor. I said, how'd she even know I'm still a chiropractor? So I want you all to just sit back every once in a while, and it's okay to do that, because no one does that with us, right? The only ones that really have tremendous gratitude towards us are our patients. And sometimes I don't think we remember how powerful we are and how much of difference we make in their lives. So I've kind of been on this philosophy kick lately. When I FCS, I kind of threw them off a little bit. I was teaching ethics and risk management, and I just kept throwing all this philosophy into the science. And I had about 5 or 6 people text me today and said that was such a good talk. You should tell them all to mix the philosophy. And I was like, well, the purpose of it was to understand that our philosophical belief system and what we say is the foundational tenets of this profession has more science supporting it than you can ever imagine. But we have to understand that it's the one thing that we don't get across to people is our philosophy, is who we really are. And because we lock ourselves away from that and we try to meet people where they are, we seldom get deep into topics with them, because we're really just trying to help them, and helping them is where they're at. And I'm not saying you shouldn't acknowledge where they're at, but it can't be the only thing you talk about to these patients, right? So I try to give them some examples. I have a board in my rooms. Who people have been to my office. I have a PEX board, thanks to Gary. My physical, emotional, chemical board, which has all researched articles and information, things I've written, things other people, other chiros have written, and really what science has written. And we want people to get this big idea, but we're constantly, pushed into this constantness of it's here, doc, today. It's back here. I did this. They always revert back to that old mindset of we're going to help them with their pain. And they want to think that we're this intermittency between what pain is, what the cause of it is, and somewhere in the middle, the chiropractor makes that all come together and more complete of an understanding. And then we start to talk to them about their philosophy and the simplicity of you have a subluxation, you have a structural problem, here's the functional deficit, this is what's happening, here's why your soft tissue is swollen. And we can go into those conversations with those people. But remember, those conversations are only going to be for that moment and maybe in the initial stages of care. Because when they're out of symptoms and they're better functioning, we all know that the conversation can't be the same. What's going on today? How are you feeling from a perspective of function? How much more can you do? How much better has it been since the first day you walk in here? We're constantly in this realm of making them feel better, but we get lost in our language because we forget to go back and tell them, remember, chiropractic, the vessel, human body, the healer, right? We forget that sometimes, and they often leave here thinking you did, or leaving your offices, you did what you did, and you're the one who got me this way. And they want to give you the accolades and pat you on the back, but I try to look at them and say, if you only knew the power you possess, if you only get past this point, you'll realize that there's so much more to chiropractic than just what we were able to do for you. And you have to make sure that if that's all they really want, and you haven't had the time to educate them, then you have to let them go and you let them figure it out. We can't sell them a used car on the way out the door and tell them we have a lifetime wellness plan. Those are conversations that exist along the way. So I got on this philosophy thing and I wanted to look at, so what did the greatest thinkers think back in the days, right? You're talking hundreds of years ago, through the eons of time of the human race. What has the people that were respected the most and the people that thought the best and were considered the brightest minds of their time, right? To this day, we know their names. The one emphasis that most of them always talked about was health. Because let's be honest, unless you had money, unless you had a roof over your head and access to food, and you weren't a soldier or something, you weren't living too long, right? You're lucky you lived to 35. And the reality of that is health was more an important thing because they realized their lifespans were very short, right? And so, you look at somebody like Aristotle. What did he talk about? He talked about, health to balance, talked about things in moderation, talked about an appropriate diet and movement and exercise. Here's someone talking about what we talk about every day from a couple of 100 years ago, if not more, right? When you think about that, right? He emphasized the role of daily routines, rising early, highlighted the value of the body, expressing that it's unfortunate to grow old without having to enjoy its strength and beauty. Basically, he was talking what Antonovsky was talking in the 50s, right? Salutogenesis, that there's this unbelievable process of maintaining one's health and keeping ourselves well, right? And he called it the golden mean, right? Socrates, he was more the one who said, if you would seek health, first look to the spine, not Hippocrates, right? And he felt that it was a disgrace to not take care of yourself, right? And that, you should look to have your body in such a great shape and your beauty in such a refined way and put it to the highest limit. And that should be your goal in life, to keep yourself well, right? An emphasis that we have had in chiropractic. And when you start reading these speakers, DD and BJ were looking at their stuff. They were listening and watching and looking and reading and saying, these people, this is where we're at. This is where we want to go with healthcare, And so you have Plato, right? Who, he believed the ideal physician should be philosophically trained to grasp the entirety of the individual rather than merely addressing, the ailments they had or the problems they had, right? So he was talking about balance in life, right? A virtuous life. He prioritized the health of the soul over the body. So he was also talking about this connection between spirit and man. Again, so how far are we off as chiropractors? we're always laughed at in regards to our philosophical foundations, but our philosophical foundations are in great company with some of the greatest minds that have ever lived on this planet, right? And here's hypocrisies, right? Listen to this. Natural forces within us are the true healers of disease. This statement reflects his conviction that the body's inherent power is the key element in overcoming illness. When my patients see that Hippocrates said that and Socrates, some of the teachers, they're like, is this real? Or because I write a lot of stuff and put it up there. And they're like, or is this you just writing? I said, no, this is from the internet. This is from, investigating these individuals, right? Everyone has a doctor in him or her. We just have to help it in its work. If that stuff doesn't sound like DD and BJ, right? So that they were looking at this as they were creating that philosophical foundation, right? And so here's DD, right? What was chiropractic philosophy? It was an understanding of how vital functions are carried out by innate intelligence in both health and illness, right? And so he talked about life representing the spirit expressed through the physical form. For life to be realized, there must be a connection between spirit and body. Larry Webster used to always say to me, the greatest adjustment he ever gave was a guy that came in. He was basically on his deathbed. He'd been taking care of him for a while. He was terminally ill. And he came in and he wasn't looking good that night. And Larry put him on a table and adjusted him and left the room. And when he came back, the guy was dead. And he always told me the greatest adjustment he ever gave was connecting the spiritual man with the physical man. And yeah, he definitely had to call the local mortuary place, the funeral home. He had to call the police, to get them because he had a dead man in his practice. But the reality was, at first he was scared as hell, but when he contemplated on it and he sat down, he realized, when he was talking to himself and sitting with himself, he realized that might be the greatest accomplishment I've ever had in my life. That I was able to take this man in pain and suffering and transition him to the next level. I think that's what we all try to do at some level, but we just don't want anybody dying in our practice, right? But we definitely want them to take a step up and step forward into worlds that they've been afraid to encounter because they just didn't have the knowledge. And so that's why, sometimes when you're really doing high volume, you don't really get the chance to speak to people on a one-on-one basis because you're moving so much. And so to me, I think that hurts the profession sometimes, unless you've really got someone who's got a super healthcare class, makes it mandatory and puts people through the process. One of the things that I got away from during COVID and now have implemented back into my practice, and the difference is remarkable. I got patients now coming in with questions, bringing me literature saying, hey, the other night when you were talking about that, I saw this on the internet. I thought you'd be interested in this. Now I got them thinking. Now they're thinking more about what if, what's the possibility of, instead of, oh, it's just Dr. Carrino is going to do that, 3-minute adjustment, going to turn my power on, and, I'm going through the motions. And then when they start to feel better, they don't understand why, but they go, oh, I guess this is what treatment is. And they only equate what we're doing to how they feel. And we lose them as that process goes by, because then how they feel, because they feel good so much, they start to second guess themselves and say, well, I feel good all the time. And you know what? I don't really need that anymore. And then we try to fight with them to bring them back into our worlds. And what we're really doing is pushing them farther away. I'd rather ask them the questions of why they've come to these conclusions as opposed to telling them that they're wrong, right? Or telling them what they need. I'd rather ask them, why do you think you don't need, care anymore because you don't have any symptoms? And then I use analogies. I think the best analogy is cholesterol medication, blood pressure medication, diabetes medication, right? We take your blood sugars right now. We check your blood pressure. We check, your cholesterol levels. They're all normal. And they go, yeah. And I say, why are they normal? They say, oh, because I take my medication. I said, but now that they're normal, why do you continue to take your medication? And they said, well, I have to in order to keep that way. Oh, okay. Now I get them, they get that look, that glazed look at like, you're trying to make a point. I said, I am. Because what I'm telling you is I'm glad you're feeling better. I'm glad you're functioning better. But why would you want to stop here? Just getting to that place. It's like getting to the 5-star hotel, walking into the lobby, seeing what a beautiful place, and then go, and the person that you're with goes, "Oh, I don't like this place. This is the wrong place." Right? It can't be that way, guys. We have to find this equal ground with the population, and the only way we're going to bring them over onto our little island is if they're fully aware that a ferry even exists to get over there. And they're not. They're not aware of a lot of the things we tell them. And when we do tell them, if they really have a question about it, don't just blow them off. Sit and further explain. And if they really want to know it at another level, tell them, "I'd be more than happy to prepare something for you so you can read it." And then we can have more questions, because I'm not going to sit here 20 minutes in the room because you didn't make the healthcare class. Right? So again, how much we allowing them to see who we are is the key. Right? BJ, talked about, we create a process where we're not altering your environment to see if you fit into it. We're creating such a healthy person that it doesn't matter the environment we throw them in, they're going to survive and they're going to thrive. And we want them to understand what it really means that nature requires no assistance, only the absence of interference. And they don't get that, right? Until you really explain to it. But you can't explain it to like you're talking to a chiropractor. You have to be able to explain this in their world. So I simply say, okay, you would think right now, if you take your cell phone out, you would need no assistance in getting a phone call. My office sucks for internet service, right? So when they're in my office, you always hear them in the rooms cursing, like, "Can't get on there, can't get a phone call," right? You hear them talking to each other. And I always say, you don't need assistance for your phone to work, but you're definitely going to understand that if you don't move into a different location, you're not going to be able to remove this interference and create a normal conversation or a normal connection. And I always say to them, I said, it's amazing. I could have 5 bars standing on the planet Earth right here. I got 5 bars. And then I walk 5 steps to my right or left, and now I got 2. So what did you do? You're going to sit there and try and talk with 2 bars or try and connect? You're not going to be able to. You need 5 bars. So you're walking around with 2 bars right now, but you're still able to connect, but the connection isn't full enough. It's not strong enough. It's not focused enough. And you're not going to get the full connection. So it'll start with you having interference. Some of that pain will come back. Some of that disability will show up. Some of that inability to do certain things in prolonged periods of time will show up. And is that what you're going to use as a gauge to come see me? So we got to find a way. And I'm sure with the people that are on here right now, the combined years and experience and practice is phenomenal. So if I was to grab all of us together and say, okay, let's have a plan to how we're going to communicate to people. What's the best things you've ever said to someone where you just hook, line, and sinker them, right? Right at that one statement you said. I don't think there's enough of those conversations among us when we're just hanging out that, someone comes with a little pad and pencil and starts writing down these little anecdotes and these little answers to some stressful conversations that you have, and really making it more simple. Because I think we get too crazy with what we're telling people. And when we're sitting there trying to explain their x-rays, they don't even know if it's a skull on there, a neck on there, a low back on there. I remember I had a low back on there once, and the guy said, "Where's my head?" I said, "On the 3 other shots we're going to pull out later, but this is your low back." He had no idea what the hell he was looking at. And so we want to go up there and start talking to him about subluxation and all these bones and this. We have to keep it simple, right? So here's Nietzsche. Nietzsche took a different stance, right? That which does not kill me strengthens me, right? So he believed, that health represents a victory of a self-determined will to overcome external circumstances, meaning it's more than merely the lack of illness, but an indication of strength and capability, right? So Nietzsche took a different approach. But if you read deep into this, what was he saying? It is important to you as a human being to work your hardest to be the best, is basically what he's saying, right? And it's not just this lack of illness thing because you feel good all of a sudden, because there's plenty of people who feel good. One of the things I say to my patients when they say, "Oh, I'm feeling great and stuff, so much better, doc," and I always tell them, remember, a terminal cancer patient has good days, right? And I just want them to grasp that for a second. Some of them look at me funny. Some of them say, "Yeah, I get it." And some of them just look at me and say, well, I don't have cancer. I said, no, that's not the point I'm trying to make. I'm trying to make that if you base your health on how you feel, you may be very dissatisfied when you come to the realization that you haven't participated in your own healthcare and taken care of yourself. You didn't just go by, well, whatever happens, happens kind of mentality. Right. And then, we have the World Health Organization came back in the 20th century, had a definition that, we all talked about back in the day. When I was in school, we loved the World Health Organization's definition, of all the organs and tissues working together, to create this functional system, and that physical, mental, and social dimensions of well-being were part of health. Right. And so a lot of those philosophers kind of got beat up a little bit back then because we were already moving into that drug therapeutic model. And let's really be serious, guys. 1928, Fleming went away for the weekend, came back to his lab, and found that a fungus had invaded a petri dish and had killed Staphylococcus that was in the petri dish. A mistake was made, and the greatest discovery in the history of medicine at that time came about, right? So you're trying to tell me that the discovery of antibiotics, the foundation of probably drug therapeutics, right? That was an accident. People could understand that and say, "Oh, that's how it happened. What a wonderful thing." But they can't grasp a deaf janitor who had been deaf because of a fall gets adjusted and his hearing's restored. Right? Could never get that. They look at that and they look at you when you give that story to them and they just kind of shake their heads and say, "Well, can you help deaf people?" I said, "I can help everybody. I don't know if their deafness is going to be cured or go away. That's their body to determine that." And again, so what do? They lose sight of the possibility of and look at that as a fact and then say, "Well, can you reproduce that?" Right? And that's not what Edie was able to do. Right? But I am sure some of you have adjusted people and say, "Oh my God, my ear just popped and now I can hear better. All of a sudden I'm clearer." Right? Yeah, okay, so maybe that was part of it too. But the reality was there was more of a change in that moment than any person you could take care of for 20 years with low back pain, right? And if that was the only reason why people came to us, we found out really quickly that he couldn't reproduce that. But what he did see was all these other people who had ailments start to self-limit, resolve, right? And so he said, "I found something. It just isn't the cure for deafness." So we have, I believe, a very good avenue to helping people with low back pain and neck pain and headaches and all the symptomatology that usually drives them to a chiropractor. But I think if we don't teach them why that happens and we just make them think it's this manipulative thing, we have people in our own profession making statements that make it even harder, right? So here's associate professor at Monash University, right? Chiropractic Journal of Australia. He's saying that suggesting that spinal adjustments remove potential neural irritations or blockages between the brain and the body, allowing it to function the way it is designed to, and thus cures or relieves various non-musculoskeletal conditions, invokes the discredit chiropractic vitalistic dogma of subluxation. Right? They hate that word vitalistic, right? They hate that, you can't control everything. It is a healing, self-healing mechanism, and you are not in control. Even if you create an adjustment, remove the subluxation, the human body is going to do what the human body does. And hopefully it does it in a better fashion, a more succinct fashion, and a quicker fashion when they are unsubluxated. Okay? But we also know that, subluxations can be good for you, right? Because those are the things that help the body understand that something's going on. But when you're trying to state a definition and trying to explain a very difficult thing sometimes, you get lost when people come up and show you this kind of stuff, and it's chiropractic. It's our own profession. Here's the FCA. This guy's a DC and an MD, right? He's saying that it's an unproven myth that it's an inappropriate inclusion in any chiropractic education. Well, listen, you want to see the proof of subluxation? Go talk to an upper cervical practitioner who gets an L5 disc herniation that comes in his office and he's adjusting or she's adjusting atlas and axis. And that disc somehow retreats back into the spinal column, and that person has no more sciatic pain, and no one directly touched their lumbar spine. If
Anthony,
we're going to prove,
there was a
go
post
ahead.
by the ICAK this weekend that said if you roll an L5, what you do is actually torque the dura at C1.
Well, there you go. Right. So to me, if I'm really going to explain, if I'm really going to, I think they get even more confused why an upper cervical adjustment make their low back pain go away. But I simply say, well, you take a pill through your mouth and it goes into your intestinal tract and it made your sciatic pain go away for 3 hours. So why can't you think about an upper cervical adjustment can do the same thing? Right? They need that exact location kind of mentality in order for them to really get it, right? And so I think when they get it at the other level, they really become more of a lifetime chiropractic patient because they understand it, that it wasn't Dr. Carrino just putting his bone back in place because that's what it appears to them in their low back, or that drop table that did it, or the this or did it, whatever that is. When they get an upper cervical adjustment, they see change in the physiology that isn't even in the area of the adjustment. I think that holds a very powerful, position in their head where they said, yeah, but why did that go away? He didn't even touch my low back, right? Why did that improve? All right. The other problem that we have is now we're bringing out these doctors, and their philosophical foundation is kind of all over the place when they come from certain schools. And then it's very focused when they come from more of the straighter schools. And there's this constant connotation that you see being little things that they're making notes of in regards to this LSOP scenario, right? Which is this limitless scope of practice scenario that they believe students are favoring. And this is someone who writes this. When you look at who it is, it's your typical naysayers, deniers. But the reality of this is they put words in people's mouths by using these research papers that they come up with, right? They look at limitless scope of practice and they say that in their heads because doctors of chiropractic say, I'll take care of a cancer patient. I'll take care of a person who's had a stroke. I'll take care of a person who's got heart disease. I'll take care of a person with diabetes. And that's not a limitless scope of practice because the way they're taking care of them is not saying your adjustment will make your diabetes go away, or, your adjustment will heal you of cancer. They're saying that a person who has a spine that is subluxated, it doesn't matter what disease they have, if I can adjust them and I'm not going to hurt them, or it's not going to be risky to do something, that's what I'm doing. It has nothing to do with a limitless scope of practice. My scope of practice is a very specific chiropractic adjustment given at the right time for the right reason. And see, when you put this limitless scope of practice, the perception is they think they can cure. They think they can cure anybody. They think your chiropractic heals everything. This is the mindset that they try to turn that conversation around, right? And so they come up with stuff with exploring the relationship with personality, magical thinking, and academic achievement. This magical thinking thing has showed up quite a bit in our literature. And it's a slap in our face if you're a straight chiropractor or if you're a subluxation-based thinker, right? Right? This beliefs about SMT are linked to a broader understanding of practice, right? And the recent studies have shown that chiropractic conservatives, and look at the son of a guns, what they do, they call it chirocon, right? The bastards that wrote this, right? It's it's the con of chiropractic. It's associated with these beliefs, right? So our objective was to explore chirocon and the views on SMT by analyzing three elements: intolerance of uncertainty, academic achievement, and a propensity for magical thinking, and how these elements relate to chirocon and this, limitless practice scope. Okay, this is a problem when our own profession is putting stuff out like this, when there is tons of research that supports what we do. And if you keep sticking it in this world here, where, it's all about spinal manipulation, then there are very limited things that a manipulation does to a joint space, right? That's why you can manipulate a knee and you can manipulate a rib and you can manipulate fingers and wrists and elbows, but you're not making a tremendous impact on functional health. You're just dealing with a localized phenomenon, right? Person's got a carpal tunnel and you're adjusting their wrists. This takes that further and says, we're going to localize what you guys can do by calling this SMT. You're going to get in line with the osteopaths. You're going to get in line with the physical therapist. And here's where you guys are going to be. And there are a large portion of our profession are looking for that front door to open. And it's a damn shame because let's be honest, guys, 3 or 4 schools are teaching what we learned. And no student is getting the education you guys that are sitting here, gals are sitting here, have gotten. The education from 20, 30 years ago is completely different than what it is today from the perspective of how our philosophy intermingles with the science of what we know and the things that we do as chiropractors. Those three, that is the triad of chiropractic practice. Go ahead,
Anthony,
John.
on that last slide, you had Charlotte LaBeouf.
Uh-huh.
Right? People should recognize that name. She is the new Stephen Pearl. Some of the stuff she writes is so nasty, it's unbelievable. But if you guys, if anybody bothered by this, what Anthony's bringing up, you need to take a look at Simon Senzon because he has his entire PhD on the fact that a lot of the stuff that they're writing has been self-referencing. So anyway.
And that's a great point, John, because if you've ever heard that lecture that he does, he points it all out, how he takes all their research and just shows it's research that really had minimal credentials, and then they just continued to move using that research as the foundation for all the future stuff that they say. Just crazy, right? So what is magical thinking? People who engage in magical thinking believe that their thoughts, feelings, and actions impact their life. They don't. This is them, right? This is them trying to explain magical thinking, right? I can tell you right now, there's a difference that when your thoughts and your heart and your intent and your actions are congruent with who you are, you know that you make the biggest impact on life, right? You know that when you walk in that office and you got one of those days where you're just like, I am ready, man. This is what's coming in today. I'm on fire. When you're like that, there's no cancellations in the book, right? People are coming in. You're getting calls from old patients. People are coming in. I didn't have an appointment today, but I wanted to come in today, doctor. Something made me come in. When you're on fire and your intent is right and your skills can match that intent and that on fire, you are unstoppable, my friends. And the problem is we're so bogged down with the garbage that we have to deal with initially by taking a new patient in. We often forget all the things we really need to say to them, right? And so, magical thinking is very common in childhood and continue into adulthood. While it may be harmless, it can also be a symptom of mental health conditions such as magical thinking and OCD. So I've always been told I'm nuts. Crazy that I'm a chiropractor instead of a medical doctor and didn't follow the family, world. And I am extremely happy in the direction and choice I made. And so if magical thinking is anything, as far as Arthur C. Clarke said, it's just science that we don't understand yet. Right? Because I am sure that when in 1928 Fleming found that magic, they didn't want to think that magic exists. And that's why they didn't implement antibiotics until when? 1940. So 11 years went by of this guy trying to prove what he found is good. He just couldn't he couldn't create large batches of it, and he couldn't isolate anything. But when the new science started rolling forward in the 40s, they actually started to figure out how to culture it, figure out how to, find out what was really doing it. And antibiotics became a household name. And Fleming
it interfered with the opium, the cocaine, and the laudanum.
Well, and think about, and that was my next phrase. I was going to say not mention those, but think about what they exposed people to and what they were giving people. I mean, mercury, they used to give them mercury pills, and want to know why their tongue was blue and their teeth were turning different colors, right? I mean, the reality of this trial and error scenario of medicine, could you picture being the first one who got an appendectomy, right? Or the first or the first person who had their gallbladder removed, right? Or the first person who had to have an artery repaired. They didn't repair arteries back then. What did they do? They cut your arm off, your leg off. Look at all the amputations that were done in the Civil War because they didn't know how to patch up an artery, and the injuries were so severe that they just cut it off and cauterized it. So, medicine began extremely barbaric. Drug therapy began that way. But you know what? Chiropractic did not play any way in that world of doing things barbaric to people. We weren't killing people in the name of future research, right? Our research was improving people's function, right? So, I always love this. This is my Medicare out, right? When Medicare patients come in, this is what I show them. I said, yeah, you can use your Medicare and care protocols in the beginning of our care. We'll help you get out of that pain and make you feel better if that's why you're here. But the reality is, I want you to understand how your Medicare limits you from being a healthy person. And I just showed them this, right? And then they realize when they're feeling better, they either try to do one of two things. One, they try to write on your forms and your re-exams that I'm still a 7 out of 10. And I still can't do this now. I said, you've been under care for 12 weeks. I seen you run up my steps today. You sat in there playing with one of the little kids by the toy box. You're not a 7 out of 10 today. So stop playing the Medicare game. Get functional. We're going to reduce your care. You're going to get less care, and you're still going to be as healthy because you don't need to come see me 3 times a week, right? But here's everything right here, guys. Any treatment that seeks to prevent disease, promote health, and prolong and enhance the quality of life, or a therapy that is performed to maintain or prevent deterioration of a chronic condition is not covered. And they get kicked off when they see that. I said, would you like me to get the CMS book so I could show you what page it's on? And they just look at me and they go, no, doc, I know you wouldn't. I was like, so here's what your Medicare thinks about you being healthy at 80 years old, at 75 years old, that you shouldn't be. And you shouldn't do things that help you get there, right? So I'm a big conflicts clarified guy, right? I have a company called Improving Clarity. I deal with lots of businesses. I also deal with, the chiropractic profession. But basically, I go in and read things and look at things and say, okay, here's why people are lost and why they can't understand what you're trying to teach them or tell them, right? And so if we're going to deal with the public, they know nothing about what we do. And so we can't get in there for an hour and teach them a healthcare class, but we can at least meet them where they're at and explain to them that there's a different path that we're going to take and a different way that we're going to approach this, right? And so I rather clarify those conflicts in my first visit with the patient, to ensure that, they're going to follow what we say and get the most of chiropractic, right? So we want to deal with these, misconceptions and these disagreements. And something as simple as, so what do you know about chiropractic? What have you heard? And who did you hear that from? I'm not saying you're right, you're wrong. I want to know what you know. I want to know how you know it. And I want to know who told you. Okay. And then I want to know, what do you think about all that? And obviously they thought something positive because they're in your office, right? But I want to know, what are your concerns? What is it that you heard about chiropractic that you are afraid of, or even questioning whether or not you should be here today? And you know what? When you ask that truthful question where you really just want to know, they say it right to your face. Somebody told me that, you can have a stroke. Someone told me you could break my neck. Someone told me if you if you adjust my child's spine, it's not even developed yet, you can paralyze them. These are the things that people hear, right? So remember, this is what people think, right? And in this realm, they don't think bad. They just think that here's the medical doctor knows everything. This is what I believe, right? So I'm a dummy. The doctor knows everything, right? Doctor handles everything. All the patient has to do is show up, right? Doctors determine how quick you get better, right? And treatment centers on symptoms, which doctors manage, right? This is all what the common sense mentality of the public is, right? They always say, hey, don't worry about it. You'll feel better within the week. And insurance covers everything, right? In medicine, maybe. But it's amazing how many people are finding out at the beginning of January that medicine doesn't cover anything until they meet the deductible, right? So the realities of this come by them really quick. The common misconceptions, and they're still out there, right? The big one is that I'm not a real doctor, right? I have doctor before my name, but that's just DR, right? The other one that always bothered me was that we're only for back pain. This is what the public thinks. We got to go in there and meet them where they're at, but we also have to take them where we are. And so we have to look at this stuff, guys, and we have to understand this is what really is coming into our offices. Don't just, do things without having a preparation. And so, my front desk is my wife, who's a chiropractor of, 34 years. And I'm fortunate to have a very intelligent, nice woman at my desk who could really explain to them what I'm about to, go through with them, what this whole thing's going to entail. So, you have to look at some of these things, and I'll be more than happy to send this whole thing to you if you want it. You need to look at some of these things and say to yourself, I only need one or two of these little cliche, these little sayings, these little things that certain chiropractors just have, and it just comes out of their mouth. And one of my favorites was, and I think it was Russ Rosen, John, who said it to me in a lecture I was listening to. He basically said, when a patient came back, and it's been like the third or fourth time the person came back, the question that was the most significant was, why do you think your problem has been returned? Right? Not, see, I told you so. See, I knew it would return. It was more so, why do you think it's back? Why do you think it happened again? Right? And why do you think now it's a little more advanced? Right? They have to meet you there. They have to answer that question. Don't answer that question for them, because the truth will only come out of their mouth. It's not going to come out of yours. Right? And then I want to question their expectations. So what do you think is going to happen here? I got the Harry Potter wand and everything's going to go away? Or do you think it's going to be a process? Process of time, right? One of the 33 principles. I think it's number 6, right? There is nothing that can occur that's going to occur without the process of time. And so we can't just go along to get along, right? Medical necessity. My favorite, people go, oh, they told me I have unlimited care based on medical necessity. Well, medical necessity is not what you think it is. It's not a get out of jail free card. It's not a get all the care you want for free card, right? It is a process where you are looking at this individual and from your scope saying, I see the problem. I know what I can do to find that problem and fine tune it. I know the type of danger there is if the problem isn't taken care of. I know the safety of how to take care of them. And now I'm going to provide them with a diagnosis, and I'm going to provide them with a care plan. And that is for a very specific process, not for a wellness patient. It's for a very specific process. So when they walk in your door with a very specific complaint and a very specific process, take them through the process of understanding. Go ahead. I missed you. I missed someone. Do you have a question? Okay. And I love Bill Esteb. Got to meet Bill at an early age when I was in practice. My first 5 years of practice, I was a Renaissance doctor, and Bill worked in the same building as Felicia and Riekman, and became friends. And Bill has given me some gems in my life from just a perspective of taking the patient's point of view and sitting back and saying, what do they really want? What they're saying may not be that, right? And so let's be honest, whether they admit it or not, they've all been on the medical care. They've all most likely taken drugs, right? And they have this quick fix allopathic perspective. And you're not there to whitewash that. You're there to say, here is the difference in what we do. And he even says this pre-existing attitude can affect your capacity to influence and direct these people. So you got to stay strong, right? So here's some doctor insurance stuff. I want to clarify what my goal is today, right? I want to decide whether or not, and here's another key phrase to tell these people. When a person calls us and asks us, here's what's going to happen today, but let me explain to you. Today, what we're going to do, the exams we're going to do, and the advice doctor's going to give you is going to determine whether or not you're a patient that can be accepted as a chiropractic patient in our practice. I don't just tell them, yeah, come on in, we'll accept you, right? When they come into our office, we tell them today is about whether or not you'll be accepted as a patient in our practice. I want them to understand we don't accept everybody, and not everybody can have chiropractic care. And let's be realistic in that, right? There are certain people that come in, just have the wrong mindset or have the wrong health problem, and maybe chiropractic isn't for everyone. And for some reason, chiropractors have a problem with that, right? If you've seen some of the things I've seen in the risk management world, you might not be so quick to just jump on a person and say we can help everybody, right? And so again, we go through a process. I ask them questions, right? I promise I'm not going to waste your time or your resources, but I want you to know if you let me go through this process, does it sound reasonable for you to take that time to do it? I want to know what they think because I want these questions answered on the first visit. I'm not dealing with this into the third week of care. And now you're not showing up, right? I want them to understand. And I go through all the processes with them in how the office functions and how they're going to communicate with us and how important it is to maintain care. We go through the whole process with them. And I think a lot of times we think these people know what we're talking about, especially if we got one who's real, excited about care. And we sometimes half-ass what we do. Okay. So I did the first step. I took them through. I talked to them about their history. I tell them what we're going to do in the exam. They know everything up front before I do it. Okay. I don't just put them on the table, say, get on the table and start examining. This is why you're prone. This is why you're supine. This is what my hands are going to do. Here's the areas I'm going to touch. You don't just do a leg check and start palpating someone's buttocks, especially if you're the opposite sex, right? People are funny with touch, so you got to let them know I'm going to touch you here. Chiropractic hands on. You have to let them know. Prepare them for what you're about to do because they may say, "Hey, I'm really ticklish. Please don't touch me this way. I get spasms if you touch my low back." Or, "Hey, I was abused as a younger person. I really have a problem with touch. I heard a lot of great things about you, but I'm very skeptical." And then you got to sit down. You got to go back through a process, but don't just do things right in this report of findings to make a person feel better. We want them to be knowledgeable and understand what they're getting themselves into, right? And so in this report of findings, they're going to learn how to trust you. They're going to learn where you're at, right? And if you're not addressing their immediate needs, I'm telling you, don't got them long, guys, right? You need to address their immediate needs, and you need to be this person who's able to talk our philosophy and deal with those immediate needs, right? Because that's why they walked in. They're a consumer, right? If you walk into McDonald's and you want a Big Mac and a guy gives you a chicken sandwich, you're not too happy, right? So the reality is, what are they asking for? And then in the process, maybe the guy at McDonald's would say, well, the chicken sandwich is half the price of that Big Mac. And they're just freshly cooked. And you get free fries with those. You might be able to sway them into trying the chicken sandwich, right? But in your practice, you've got to teach them for them to accept what you do. All right. And here's these last three slides. I just want you to get a grasp here, right? We try to be friendly and be their friends, our patients, right? It's the same thing that I think young parents are doing today. We're trying to be their kids' friends, right? I don't want to be your friend. I'm going to be friendly to you. And we can create a friendship over time, but friendships take years to develop because they're based on trust. They're based on actualities of events that you did together or actions that you saw people take and say, man, I want that person in my life. These are the people I jive with, right? And so we're not going to create a friendship on the first day, but we're going to be friendly and have empathy towards what they're complaining about and why they're here, right? And so we want them to understand that we're not going to go along to get along. Here's how things work. Here's what we do. And if you understand what we do, here's what your responsibility is in the practice. All right. Here's how you come into our office. Here's the visits we advised. We do it on a repetitive basis. We will explain to you why that happens. right? Here's how you set up your visits each week. Here is your co-payment. They have to know everything. Why are you not putting them in a full understanding of what goes on? There should be no surprises in your practice. The only surprise should be, oh my God, I can't believe how much better I feel. I can't believe how much healthier my body feels, how better I sleep, how better my digestion is. And you know what, doc? My sciatic pain's gone. That's the person that I know I can continue to educate. Right. But let's not just go along to get along, because if you don't start promoting our principles and our philosophy at the beginning, it's definitely going to complicate you down the road, because you know you're going to have that conversation about lifetime healthcare and lifetime wellness and the maintenance of their spine. All right. You know, least resistance will eventually cost you. I say clarify everything up front. Let your patient know everything and let them make a true, a true statement in saying, I'm in, right? They have to make a commitment to who you are and what you do. And if they're not doing that, then they're kind of just going through the motions. And if they're getting better, they get locked into that. I'm feeling better. I'm getting better. I'm feeling better. And then once they are better, how are they judging it again, guys? How they feel and how they're functioning. But the reality is they don't remember the degenerative arthritis, the cervical lordosis that's gone. They don't remember the disc degeneration. That's why it's nice to have, like, one thing I always appreciate about Gary. Gary has the X-rays up on the big screen there when you walk in the room and stuff. It's very intimidating. But you get to see, here's you. Remember, that's who you are. We know you feel better, but that hasn't changed one bit. It's such an emphasis to say, yeah, okay, we understand you're feeling better and functioning better, but we haven't done anything to change your spine. So again, what direction are you sending them in? All right. I like the teach back method. This isn't Bill. This is back to Russ. Russ, this is a great thing Russ taught me, right? To communicate, to them back to, what you just said, right? And I simply just say, okay, so we just talked about 3 or 4 things. What's the one thing you got out of that you could really emphasize back to me? Because I don't say repeat it all back. I just say, out of all we just talked about in the last 5 to 10 minutes, what is the one thing that stuck out in your mind? What is the one thing that you could say, I get this? And what is the one thing you say, man, I really lost you there, doc? Because I want to know those 2 things. Right? I want to know what they got from what I just taught them, what I just showed them about themselves, and what it is that I'm going to do or they're going to do to commit to it. Right. So here, to make sure we're simple as this, to make sure we're on the same page, can you please tell me in your own words how often you need to be seen for care and why? Something simple as that, right? And just sit back and listen to what they have to say, right? If we want them to trust us, right, we need to be good communicators. It's really that simple. And I think if you're not a good communicator, I think you need to put yourself around some of these people that are on this call right now, and listening in and grab their ear, because they're all really good communicators, right? We need to understand that it's the key to everything. It's the key to your success. They need to know who you are, what you're about, what your office is about, and what you could do for them. And then you could sit there all day long trying to figure out how you're going to help them. Right? I always give them the luxury of speaking without interruption. It was a hard thing to do in my beginning stages of my practice. My wife used to make me wear a button that says shut up and listen, because I talk too much. Because I'm constantly trying to educate. I'm constantly have my little models in the room, and I'm constantly trying to get it in their head. Right? So again, I give them back their story, and I try to make it as succinct as possible to exactly what they said. So after hearing their story, I said, okay, just to make sure we're on the same page. If I understand correctly, about 8 months ago, I don't know what happened here, guys. Did I lose you?
I just took the share down there, Tony.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Um, if I understand you correctly, you slipped on an icy sidewalk about 8 months ago, had low back pain and neck pain. You said that, it wasn't that bad. I took a couple medications. It got me through the day. But over the past few months, you're saying that kind of came back, and now it's a little more intense, a little more debilitating, causing headaches now. Am I correct? See, what I just did right there, it doesn't even matter what they want to tell me. What I've done is I've gotten them to understand, here's someone who listened to me. Here's someone who cares about what's going on with me. And that cannot be any realer. If realer is a word, right? That cannot be more real than anything you probably do in your practice for them, because the one thing that they don't have is people listening to them anymore. And and it stinks that medicine has lost that beautiful thing they once had, which was a bedside manner. That's why all the people today think the way they still think, that the medical doctor is the cultural authority and they know everything. And that's the place I want to be. God forbid my life is at stake. It's a powerful thing, folks. Okay, I'm going to try and get you back because I lost you. Can you see me or can you just see the PowerPoint?
I can see you. We
Oh,
got we got you.
can you see the PowerPoint?
I took the PowerPoint down. I think it was last slide, right?
Okay, yeah, that was it. So I think the biggest question here is, right, if we're really going to look at how we're going to communicate to people is that I really think that we should all start training if you're weak in it, because there are definitely things that even to this day, 36 plus years later, I still struggle with certain aspects of things that I know I have to go back and get better at. I would love to see the council do something like that, where we're in a communication, seminar for 3 hours, where we're not putting people up that are just world class communicators. We're sitting with chiropractors, because there's always that one or two gems that each chiropractor has. And so I love hearing the way other chiropractors approach other things. So if you got the key to what I was trying to express today, I want you to understand that there's no reason why the skills that you have as chiropractors can't be helping more people, because your skills are there. What we're struggling with is how we're going to communicate, not just that we can help people, but why we can help them, and how we can communicate a different philosophy of what it means to be healthy, as opposed to what they believe it is to be healthy, which is, this fear and this escape from, this fear of sickness, the escape from it, hiding from it. And I'll share you with this. A young patient came in today, a young couple. The wife really gets what I do. Been here for about 2 years. And the husband, he gets, when he needs my help, he wants my help. When he's feeling good, I'll catch him next week, kind of thing. So everybody got the flu this Christmas, that wasn't taking care of themselves, overdoing it, right? And so they told me their house has the flu. I said, your house has the flu? How does your house have the flu? Well, my husband, my grandson got sick and he gave it to all of us. Still thinking that way, right? That's how they come in and talk to you. Well, my question was, well, how did he give it to you? Was it wrapped? Was it in a box? Was it an extra Christmas present? Did it come in the mail? And so what did her husband do? I said, so what did your husband do? And I was going to say his name, but I didn't. I said, what did your husband do? Well, he's walking around with a Lysol can and he's saying, yeah, we have to clean everything, and they're trying to clean everything. I said, you have a house that gets cleaned twice a week professionally. I said, how could your house be the contamination place? I said, you have a sick kid. He's close to you. You're not 100% healthy because you don't have symptoms. You're not 100% healthy because you just went through basically a whole holiday season from Thanksgiving to now, where you just did things that you don't normally do. And so your body is a little susceptible. And so you don't get germs because someone threw germs on you, because you're not sick, and neither is your husband, but everybody else was sick, including, I guess, the Anderson windows, the front door, the basement steps, because your house was sick, right? The insanity of that. When you go back and tell them things like that, you know what you get? You get a smile, and they realize, oh my God, how silly, you know, how silly that I still think that way. So, if you get anything from the short time we were here tonight and the whole hour, I hope you get that we all need to buckle down, guys, because we have an opportunity right now. You see what Kennedy is saying, you see the things they're talking about, and they're trying to get the medical doctors to embrace that and change themselves into that. Why would we need to change anything? We have a whole profession with 70,000 chiropractors sitting there that have been doing what they're trying to get medicine to do for 130 years. If we ever needed leaders, it's now. If we ever needed to get our talk down and get our healthcare class succinct and straight to the point, if we ever needed to be so on in our report of findings, it is right now. There is no better time. So I leave you with that. And I want all of you to know that I say it all the time, but I mean it. It is an honor and a privilege to be a chiropractor and to have people like you folks. I know that if the proverbial shit hit the fan, I know that there's dozens of you that I could rely on to help me in the worst times. I know there's also people that if I'm struggling with certain things, I can make a phone call to and they can put me back on track. And I hope that all of you feel that way with the people that are on this call and the people that are in this council and the peers you have that you work hand in hand with all the time, that they are there by your side because we're all in this together, right? And if we continue to move forward more together, I got to be honest with you, the person who holds the olive branch out the most and the one that I always respected is Johnny. I've got words to say to people who don't agree with me. John, I give you a lot of kudos, and I don't just say this to you because you're a good friend. You have a special gift to just kind of, and Gary too, you two guys, you just have that gift where you create that bridge. And it just seems like people want to cross who would never cross if I was on that other side of that bridge. So I appreciate you guys, brothers. You are my brothers. I appreciate everybody who came on the phone to listen to this crazy chiropractor from West Islip. And I just hope you come and you continue to share on this and you come to these council meetings, you come to the Lyceum in March, you get yourself involved again, you bring a person in. Let me tell you, you bring a person to our meetings and the council wants to charge them to be at one of the meetings, I'll pay for them. All right. Because we got to get more people in this council back to functioning again. Johnny said it to me before we got on the call that you can't imagine how many young new chiropractors here in New York State, but none of them are getting involved. That is our fault that we haven't gone to their offices, welcomed them into our profession and welcomed them to New York State as chiropractors and really said, hey, we're here for you if you need us. We know what chiropractic practice beginning is all about, and we're here. So bless you all. Thank you all for listening. Hopefully I didn't keep you too long.
Tony, do me a
especially
favor.
when you got a good football game on.
Yes, well, we got a couple of people not here because the Pittsburgh's playing tonight. Do me a favor, send me the PowerPoint because I'm sure people are going to want it.
You. Yep.
I want to thank you very much, brother. You gave a lot of thought. I'm going to talk to you about putting together something. We should put together even a 2 or 3 hour program on communication. So that's something I'm going to work on. And
listen,
thank you for coming on.
We got these young docs out there. They've got great skills. They just don't know how to communicate who they are and what they can do.
Even old
we've been blessed by people before. It's like when you were talking about that guy in the office, the first thing that comes in my head when it happens in my office is Fred Bard's The Rats in the Dump Talk. Really
simple, right?
Simple. It gets people to understand. You talked about how to deal with people on a consultation. A simple thing that everybody could take is you turn around to somebody so that you can start introducing the whole idea of healing. Did you ever break a bone or had a cut? What happened to it? And they go, it healed. Well, my question is, why didn't this? That's what we have to find out. So it's a real simple way of opening that person's mind that you have the answers and you're going to find the root of the problem.
Like it, Johnny.
Awesome.
All right, gentlemen.
Tony, thank you.
Ladies, thank you.
Thank you, brother.
Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Anthony.
Yep.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Guys, have a great night. Love you all and appreciate your commitment, man. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Bye.
Have a
Have a
good
great
night.
night,
Back at you,
guys.
brother. Right
Yeah.
back at you.
Have a good one. Woo.